Meanwhile, in Washington, the authorities are working just round the clock to recover the bodies of those who died in the mid-air collision. The investigation, remember, is still in its early stages, but the tragedy is already embroiled into a huge political slugfest. After the American President Donald Trump addressed a press conference, that these excerpts from a question-answer session in the media is why Trump's comments have kicked up a storm.
Mr. President, you have today blamed the diversity elements, but then told us that you weren't sure that the controllers made any mistake. You then said perhaps the helicopter pilots were the ones who made the mistake.
It's all under investigation.
I understand that. That's why I'm trying to figure out how you can come to the conclusion right now that diversity had something to do with this crash.
Because I have common sense, okay? And unfortunately, a lot of people don't.
All right, so that was Donald Trump's quick rebuttal, saying that he has common sense that a lot of other people don't. Now, Donald Trump, in his lengthy address, blamed the tragedy on hiring that was done under the Diversity and Inclusion Program. Now, to remind our viewers, the investigation, remember, is still underway. No conclusion has been reached yet. But the president has put the blame on the DEI program and the Biden administration for the air crash that took place 2 days ago. Now, Trump's claims are currently completely unsubstantiated, but exercising his presidential powers and furthering his agenda, the Republican president has now signed an aviation order rolling back the federal diversity initiatives. So as Trump signed the order, this is how he's also answered a journalist's question on the question of diversity.
Mr. President, to be clear, are you saying race or gender played a role in this tragedy?
It may have, I don't know. Incompetence might have played a role. We'll let you know that. But we want the most competent people. We don't care what race they are. We want the most competent people, especially in those positions. And you're talking about extremely complex things. And if they don't have a great brain, a great power of the brain, they're not going to be very good at what they do, and bad things will happen.
So as families and Americans mourn the tragedy, the Democrats have criticized the sitting president for making claims without any evidence and targeting certain communities based on gender and race on the question of diversity.
It's one thing for internet pundits to spew off conspiracy theories. It's another for the President of the United States to throw out idle speculation as bodies are still being recovered and families still being notified. It just turns your stomach.
Now, since assuming office, Donald Trump and his administration has launched a scathing attack against federal diversity hiring programs. On his first day, the president signed an executive order cancelling the DEI programs for all federal jobs and pressuring the private sector to follow suit. Now, critics have slammed the move, saying that it further gives rise to systemic racism. But Trump remains pretty steadfast in his pitch on the question of merit and competence. All right, now to give us more perspective on this, we are joined in this broadcast by Ms. Elizabeth Loris, who is a president at the E. Loris Consulting and Professor Emeritus at the University of Mary Washington. She's joining us live on this broadcast. Now, Professor, this of course is a question that I'm pretty sure the Americans will be talking about for many, many months and indeed years to come. Donald Trump, in the aftermath of this very tragic air crash that happened above Washington, D.C., seems to have indicated that the DEI hires are simply incompetent, which may have resulted in this crash, although the investigation is still underway and it is still unsubstantiated to make any of these claims. Does it now mean that anyone who's been hired as part of the DEI programs will now be made a convenient scapegoat if anything were to go wrong in Trump's America?
Well, President Trump certainly ran on a campaign of abolishing DEI programs. That was one of his first executive orders. And in fact, he did sign a very specific executive order. It's titled something like Stop the Madness in DEI in the FAA. So the problem with DEI programs is anyone who, is from a racial minority group, a different, a non-binary sexual orientation, they become suspect that they were hired, for those particular traits rather than for their skills, knowledge, and experience. So it is a rather uncomfortable situation.
And also looking at as to how this will play out in the days to come. Now, Donald Trump is dead against DEI hiring, but how does the American public look at the whole aspect of diversity and empowerment and inclusion? Because this was so important as part of the American civil rights movement to get people of all races and of all diversities to be a part of the American mainstream. Are those gains now going to be lost under Donald Trump?
I don't think the gains will be lost. I mean, remember, Donald Trump was elected by more than 77 million Americans. He not only won the Electoral College, but the popular vote. And this was one of his big campaign issues. So a lot of Americans are on board with getting rid of, the DEI. There were affirmative action programs before this, like DEI agenda came along. Along with the DEI agenda is a lot of administrators and a very large administration at universities, companies, in the government that are pushing what a lot of people see as a political agenda. On that note, when we're talking about the FAA, it was before the Obama administration, 100% of air traffic controllers were hired through the Collegiate Training Initiative program.
Right.
That was somewhat suspended, and then when DEI programs were initiated, people were qualifying with just high school diplomas if they had the right profile. So, that lends to this criticism of DEI, especially regarding the FAA and air traffic controllers.
Interesting. We'll have to see as to how this, of course, plays out. Thank you very much indeed, Professor Loris, for joining us with that perspective then.